Hello, and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I'm very excited for you to hear this next interview. I have in front of me Taylor Arnold, who is a registered dietitian, and she is going to talk all about how to grow intuitive eaters. I absolutely love the name of her business, of where you can find her online. We'll talk more about that, at the end where you can find her. But without further ado, Taylor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tony. I'm excited to be here.
You're so welcome. I think this is going to be a great conversation. I know a lot of parents listen to this podcast, so I think they're going to appreciate it a lot.
Awesome.
So the first question I always have my guests answer is to just introduce yourself by sharing who you are, what you do, and most importantly, why you do what you do.
Sure. So I'm Taylor. Like you said, I'm a dietitian, pediatric dietitian. I also have my PhD in nutrition. So I come from a background of nutrition research, and I help moms raise their kiddos to be intuitive eaters who eat a healthy, varied diet, lots of veggies, aren't obsessed with sweets, and ultimately help them reduce that risk for eating disorders later on down the road and help their kiddos establish lifelong healthy relationships with food.
That's
so
awesome.
It's awesome. I work with moms and kiddos alike on this stuff.
What made you get into that?
You know, I have always loved nutrition science, and I actually kind of fell into the behavior piece. I always thought I was going to do IV nutrition and nutrition in the hospitals and all like the super medical clinically stuff. And then I just started realizing how much teaching was required for that. And I ended up loving that piece of the nutrition component so much. And so I just decided to focus more on the teaching behaviors side. And seeing the results that these families have just made me fall in love with this area of nutrition. So
yeah. I love that you work with both the parents and the children, because we know it's really difficult. And I know you probably work with all ages, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I recently had someone on the podcast who really spoke specifically to like newborns and toddlers. I would love if we could maybe focus this conversation more on, maybe teenagers or young adults, even like living in the same household. Because I think that is where, the sad thing is that I've heard people tell me that they've started their first diet at like 6 years old. So obviously the earlier we intervene, the better. However, at the same time, I feel like the eating disorder, which we're going to talk about in the prevention of, I feel like usually starts in like that early teen area. And obviously it hits everyone differently. I'm sure you could speak to that more, but I feel like that would be a really great opportunity for us to really kind of focus on like those age groups.
Yeah. I work with 0 to 18, and my course focuses more on 0 to 10, but setting up these habits early on is what helps set those habits in motion for teens, because it's really honestly a lot harder to work with a picky 16-year-old than it is to work with a picky 4-year-old as a parent.
That's probably very true. And also, I've worked with picky adults. Love you guys. You know who I'm talking to. Very picky eater clients that still don't eat vegetables.
Yes.
We're working on it. But yeah, I think that makes sense. Like that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like the earlier you do it, the better. I agree with that.
They just have stronger and louder opinions as a teenager.
Yeah, that's probably very true too. That's very, very true. So before we even kind of jump into the how-tos and the what's and the whys and all of that, maybe you could just explain or define intuitive eating, because I know I've had people on this podcast before talk about it. I've talked about it before, but we had it on one podcast, but there's new listeners. So I think it would be nice for you to really just to define what intuitive eating actually is.
Sure. So intuitive eating is, I think it's a little more complex than it sounds, but it encompasses listening to your body's hunger and fullness cues, honoring the way that food makes you feel, and taking that into consideration. It also encompasses ignoring like the influences of diet culture that we get a lot, and focusing really on the way that you feel after you eat something and how it nourishes your body, including does it fill you up or not. And I think a lot of people hear intuitive eating and think, oh, just eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. And sure, listening to your hunger and fullness cues is a component of intuitive eating, but it goes so much deeper than that. Like recognizing the emotional and social components of food and how they factor into your desire to want to eat. And then when it comes to intuitive eating for kids, it's a little bit different than adults, because as adults, we want to have food accessible to them at all times to help reduce the risk for like binging. But with a 3-year-old, if you have like a chocolate cake sitting out and say you can eat whenever you want, that doesn't always work. So we have to bring in some other components of something called the division of responsibility when it comes to feeding kids and raising them to be intuitive eaters.
You called it the division of responsibility.
Yes.
Do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So the division of responsibility in feeding was a term coined by a really well-known dietitian. Her name is Ellen Satter. She's wonderful. And basically the principle is you provide, child decides. So it's the parent's responsibility to provide the food, decide when the food is served and what is served. And it's the child's responsibility to decide what to eat of that food and how much they want to eat. So it very clearly delineates mealtime responsibilities, and adhering to that and working with a pediatric dietitian to apply that in your house really, really helps to reduce like power struggles at meal times that we see a lot with kids.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so I guess the first question I really have for you to really dive deeper into this is, I'm sure you've met with a lot of different parents and you've seen a lot of kids. Have you noticed maybe, are there like certain common, maybe like 3, the most like common mistakes that parents are making when it comes to raising intuitive eaters?
Yes. It's funny that you say that, because I was just working on writing up some mistakes that I see parents make a lot. But I think one of the big mistakes, and it's something that parents not only do, but then they feel guilty about doing or feel guilty about even thinking about doing, is hyper focusing on their kids' weight. Because like I see a lot of parents come to me and say, well, I don't want my kid to be fat, but I know I'm not supposed to think about that and focus on their weight. So now I feel bad about that too. And so it's definitely like an interesting position for parents to be in, because maybe they have experienced situations where they felt uncomfortable because of their weight, and they don't want their kids to feel the same way. But by focusing and trying to prevent that, you ultimately can cause issues with weight down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to when I would go to the doctor and I was always on the higher percentile, and my parents never made me feel, I mean, I'll say in the doctor's office, like I never like was really made to feel bad about it, but the doctor and the nurse, even though their intention was well, it was just the tone and the way, and I still interpreted it as like, oh, I'm fat, I'm big,
Right.
and it's like, so how do you handle that? Because I feel like if we're not focused on it, but like what happens now if a child really is overweight and they really, maybe it is advised that, I mean, I know you're not supposed to make a child lose weight, but maybe you need to share that and say why. But like, kind of like, what do you do now if you do have someone who really is either underweight or overweight? And it's kind of like, we don't want to make weight the focus, but at the same time, for their health, maybe, especially like in the more extreme cases, like maybe it kind of it almost needs to be part of the focus. Do you hear what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, so I think part of the core of the issue is that we have a lot of medical providers who are not informed on this topic.
yeah.
So like old timey ideas was like, if you were above this certain percentile in the growth chart or you were below this certain percentile of the growth chart, like that is bad, period. But we really need to like look at the whole picture. But I see a lot of parents come to me who, and I have phenomenal pediatricians out there, so I don't want to like bang on pediatricians, but I do have a lot of parents come to me who say, my pediatrician said that my child is overweight, just from like one point on the growth chart, but we're not taking into account like, is the child going through a growth spurt early? Are they following their trend? And maybe they're like really athletic and they're just have a muscular build. Maybe their parents are like 6'1" and 6'6", you know, like those all play into the child's growth, and we need to look at all of those components too. So I think that that's a big piece is finding a provider who's well informed on growth. And so I do tell my parents that, or my parents of my kiddos, that if you have a doctor who makes you feel uncomfortable with the way that they're approaching your child's weight, it's okay to find a new provider who's more informed on that. So I think that's really important to know, that for parents to know that. And then really ultimately, removing restriction is going to be important when it comes to your child's weight. So for example, if you start to see that your child is gaining weight, a lot of parents will like restrict their serving sizes or not give seconds at meal times or not serve desserts. And all of those things are going to create behaviors that either make the child feel bad about themselves and start to connect emotions with food, which is something we don't want, or make dessert seem to be like this elusive, exciting thing that then they become obsessed with and want more and more and more constantly. So it's very counterintuitive with how we want to approach weight in kiddos.
Yeah. So would you consider restricting your kids be like mistake number 2? Or what would be another mistake that parents might make if they're trying to raise intuitive eaters?
Another mistake that they would make would probably be, restriction. Restriction in the form of mistakes that their parents have made. So things like the Clean Plate Club is a form of restricting your child's control over a mealtime. And then like not serving dessert would be another form of restriction. So there's a lot of ways we can restrict a child around food. But yeah, let's talk about restricting dessert, for example. I would definitely consider a mistake, because you're going to create this elusive, exciting thing. And then when they go to a birthday party, you know, they're going to have 10 cooks because they've never seen it before, or they never get it at home. So that would definitely be something that I would consider a mistake, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, going off of that, I work with a lot of women who struggle with disordered eating or have a history of an eating disorder, or presently it's kind of come back up. And we kind of have to make the decision if leaving certain foods in the house, which could be their trigger foods, is at some point it's helpful and at some point it's not helpful to leave those foods in the home. But they also tend to also be parents. And it's so how do you kind of draw the line of helping yourself while also helping your kids, and like, so raising an intuitive eater, but you're struggling with learning how to be an intuitive eater yourself?
Right. So I definitely, it's kind of like the mask on an airplane. Like, you need to help yourself before you can really teach your kids these behaviors. So if it's a struggle for mom to have a chocolate cake in the house, like let's say that's a trigger for her and she has binge eating disorder, then don't have the cake in the house, because that's going to be really emotionally hard for you. You're going to have you're going to have less from your cup to fill your child's cup, and it's just going to be harder to work on their eating behaviors, and maybe even working on their eating behaviors is going to become a trigger for you. So really, I want moms to work on themselves and those behaviors first, and then letting your kids see that journey that you're going through, I think is also really, really important, because it teaches them, you know, you're not perfect and nobody's perfect, and nutrition is really important to me, and we're going to work on this, but we're going to do it in a healthy way. And this is the healthy boundary that I need to set for myself. So
that's powerful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
One more mistake. Any
Sure.
other mistake you see parents make?
Yeah. So I would say trying to be too controlling at meal times, because you're worried about the amount of veggies that they eat, for example. Because the more pressure we put on your kid at meal times can really backfire and cause the power struggles and cause them to not want to eat their veggies. So to bring it back to the division of responsibility, again, it's your job to provide the food and their job to decide. So if you say, you know, you need to eat one more bite of veggie before you get down from the table, or you need to have a bite of broccoli before you have your cake, you're taking away their ability to decide if they want to eat that. And we've then broken those boundaries that you set. We've broken kind of a mutual understanding or trust at the dinner table. And then that can be really challenging to repair. So putting that pressure on kids can be difficult. And it's just like the restriction, it's super counterintuitive, because you hear like broccoli, it's good for calcium, it's got fiber, it's really good for my kid, they need to eat it. But then you put it on their plate and they don't eat it, then what do you do?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like, do I force them to eat it, or do I just let them not eat it? And my response for most kids, I mean, obviously there's some exceptions, but for almost all kids, it's no, we don't want to have them take one bite, because you're breaking down that trust that you have at the meal times, and they're going to be less likely to choose to eat that in the future. So what we want is we want to encourage their curiosity and their choice to choose to eat the broccoli, not force them to eat the broccoli.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how would you do that if you're not going to tell them to eat it? Like, so how could you encourage them, even though we're not trying to tell them to eat it? How would you encourage them
So
to eat
that's
it?
a
Because
really complicated question.
We want them to.
Yeah. So I mean, we definitely want them to eat the broccoli, and we want them to eat their veggies. That's really important. As a dietitian, I don't ever discount the value that veggies can bring to a child's health. But that, I mean, it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of different strategies as a dietitian that I use with my families. And so, like, for example, one would be modeling. Make sure you're eating the broccoli too, because if you set the broccoli down in front of your kid and you don't even touch it, well, what are they going to think?
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course they're
Isn't
not.
it? I'm just gonna have to just say this because I know that I'm not the only one. So my boyfriend has a 4-year-old daughter, and it's funny because I work with a lot of moms, so I always hear about this, but now I really experience it firsthand. Like, we could all sit down, we could all make our meals. I'll like make, because I eat, I do eat pretty healthy, so I'll usually add something. So I'm not like not eating what they're eating. I just like add a veggie or whatever. And never fails. She's always like, "What do you want? What are you eating? I want that. I want that."
Right.
Like, no matter what it is. And I'm like, okay, you can try.
Yeah.
But it like never fails. Or like sometimes she already ate and like I'm having a snack, and she always, it's like, it's really so true. You cannot eat in peace with these kids.
Oh my gosh, so true. Yeah.
But I think, so I hear you. So modeling behavior, and if they see it, they'll probably want it more.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of moms will ask me like, okay, well, I'm a picky eater and I hate broccoli. So now what am I going to do? Because I don't want my kid to be like that too. And you don't need to eat the broccoli, but you need to put it on your plate. Ideally, you should try a bite. You don't have to, though. I mean, we're not going to force again. But like, even if you don't eat it, like, let's talk about it. Maybe you can smell it. Maybe, you can lick the broccoli. We need to have like some interaction with the food to show the child that it's not scary and it's something that you're willing to try too, to model that to the child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super helpful. So, I mean, I was going to think about like school stuff, but I don't know if people are really even going to school. Because my question was going to be like, what happens now? You pack your kid these healthy meals, and now you find out that they've been throwing them out and like either not eating them or going to the vending machine or, or eating that. And I don't know, like, just, I guess, like, how do you handle when kids are like, the older, right? So like teenagers, where like you might make them this lunch and then you find out that they didn't eat it.
Right. So I mean, with teens, again, they're starting to become autonomous, and we want them to like be making these good choices for themselves, especially if they're planning on going to college and they're going to be in the dorm rooms where they're having all sorts of food available to them. So usually the school lunches are the last meal that we work on when I work with a family, because you're not there.
Right.
And so you can do the you provide, child decides thing. But like, if they have a job and they have money and they want to spend it on the vending machine, like, I mean, I guess there's only so much you can do about it as a parent, right? Like, you can't follow them to school and hold your hand over the coin cover on the vending machine so they can't their cookie or whatever. So it's what it comes down to is establishing those healthy habits at home for breakfast, snacks, and lunches. And then that will hopefully empower them to make those healthy choices at lunchtime. And, teens definitely are not too young to start learning about the science of nutrition and how food affects your body, and really talking to them about those things and the importance of vitamins and minerals. And, but again, it's really most important to start establishing those healthy habits at home, and then hopefully that will translate. But also, if you're really concerned and they don't have a job, don't send them with money, send them with a lunch, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the lunch they get. And if they don't want to eat it, fine. They can wait
Mm-hmm.
till they get home, and then you can provide them with a healthy snack.
Right. Right.
So it's, yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. So I think there's usually, I'm assuming people who are listening have like two scenarios, right? So you have the kid who's either a picky eater or doesn't eat well or doesn't eat healthy, or potentially in your eyes, in the parents' eyes, they're either overeating or eating too much of like sweets or whatever. But then we probably have parents who notice maybe their teens are intentionally skipping meals
Mm-hmm.
and restricting. I mean, I know that's what started for me when I was
Right.
14. That's when it really started, where I would
Right.
just have an orange for the whole day, right? And it was like, I don't, to be honest, I don't know if it was ever noticed. That's
Mm-hmm.
the saddest part. I don't know if I did a good job hiding it. It's not their responsibility to know, but I do wonder, like, when do we intervene, or, what do you do if you notice that a child is restricting their intake intentionally? So now you didn't create this, it's just maybe they heard of a friend doing a diet, or maybe, they were teased about being overweight or something like that, about their body. And so now they're starting to restrict their intake. What would you say, or what does a parent do in that
So
situation?
first of all, that's a really tough situation. And I would want
Yeah.
moms to know that they're not alone. There's a lot of moms who are experiencing the same thing. And I want moms to know that's not their fault. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if the behaviors that they're doing at home are contributing to this in their child, a lot of times these behaviors are ingrained into us, like from our childhood.
Yeah.
It's all we know. So if you notice your child going through restriction, I would 100% get them on board with a pediatric dietitian. I think at that point, it's very, very important to start working with a professional. It may also warrant working with a therapist as well, depending on the reason behind it. Like if we're working with restriction because of, body image issues or any mental health crises or anything like that, we definitely want to have a good team on board. But what can you do at home, right? Because you still want stuff to be able to do like right away at home.
Mm.
So importantly, you'll want to examine the way that you're approaching food and bodies in your house. So oftentimes I see parents who have children who are restricting. Mom and dad are doing that too. Or a lot of times they're learning that behavior in the home. So we'll want to work on that behavior, the way we talk about our bodies. So body positive talk. Sometimes I even assign families to, like, let's say 2 positive things about our bodies that we're thankful for that have nothing to do with our weight. So for
Mm.
example, like I'm a cross country runner and I'm really thankful for my legs because I just freaking love to run. Right. And so it sounds cheesy and corny, and you're going to probably have a hard time getting a 16-year-old to like do that, but it really shows the lesson that we don't focus on our weight. You definitely still want to implement. So there's a fine line, right, between when we implement the division of responsibility and when we now have to implement like an eating disorder protocol.
Mm.
And if that is the case, if we're in the eating disorder protocol world, then you definitely, again, need to be working with a dietitian who will monitor the child's intake and monitor their eating behaviors. But if we're still on this line of like, you notice just some like, I don't eat the chocolate cake anymore because I don't like, and you see your daughter looking at her legs funny in the mirror, like
Mm-hmm.
we're starting
Mm-hmm.
these behaviors. We
Mm-hmm.
want to model this body positivity. We want to model the non-restriction around food. And then we want to talk to our children about how their bodies change, because this is like really shocking for some teenagers. And then we can model these healthy behaviors for them and talk to them about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the line is touchy. I